Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte is on the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committee. She joins us. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening, Greta.
Senator, your thoughts on this op-ed by President Putin in the New York Times, speaking directly to the American people around the President of the United States?
Well, I have to say, I think it's the height of hypocrisy for Putin at this point to lecture the United States of America. What he says in the op-ed, Greta, is that we have to go to the United Nations to seek basically a resolution to do anything in Syria. And let's keep in mind who has blocked us every time we have sought a resolution in the United Nations. It's been the Russians and the Chinese. So I think it's very hypocritical of him to say that. He also says in this op-ed that it's not so much the Syrian government who has used the chemical weapons, but again, he makes the claim that the opposition forces use the chemical weapons. And that just does not stand up to the evidence here, Greta. I think, again, this really makes for him to speak directly to the American people like this in such a hypocritical way. Bear in mind, today the French, the UK, and our country went to the United Nations with a resolution. And Putin said, no, I'm not going to accept a resolution there. I don't want to go through the United Nations Security Council with regard to securing the chemical weapons in Syria. So again, at this point, I'm obviously incredibly skeptical with regard to Putin as well as Assad. I hope for the administration's sake that they are able to get the Assad regime to give up its chemical weapons in some verifiable way. But as you identified, I don't know how we verify that they've done so.
All right. And the paragraph that what you're referring to in the op-ed about the poison gas is what President Putin says. No one doubts that poison gas was used in Syria, but there is every reason to believe it was used not by the Syrian army, but by the opposition forces to provoke intervention by their powerful foreign patrons, that would be us, who would be siding with the fundamentalists. Reports that militants are preparing another attack, this time against Israel, cannot be ignored. So this, I mean, he has certainly stated his position, which side he's on this, rather than sort of in the middle trying to resolve this and try to put the lid on it.
Well, that's right. And, you know, obviously, I've been in classified briefings. I've seen the evidence. I'm convinced that the Assad regime did use the chemical weapons. And I just saw a report as I was coming over here that the United Nations report that's going to be coming forward is going to confirm that. So again, for the Russians to say that somehow the Assad regime didn't use the chemical weapons, that just doesn't fly in the face of the evidence. And that really troubles me in terms of our ability to broker an agreement with them. Again, I hope the administration is successful, but I'm very skeptical of the Russians at this point.
All right, so assume we don't broker agreement, assuming the fact that we're not satisfied that they really are going to surrender their chemical stockpiles and that we're going to destroy them, and that so now we're back to where we were. What is going to be your vote? What is your recommendation to the president?
Well, I came out today after hearing the president's speech last night. Here's been my problem from the beginning. I believe we do have interests, obviously, in Syria with regard to the involvement of Iran. And so that's why I also find it hypocritical when the Russians talk about foreign patrons. They have been giving arms to the Assad regime, as have the Iranians. So we do have interests at stake in Syria. But I've just been concerned about the fact that it's been an inconsistent and incoherent strategy by this administration, and for us to authorize military force at this time when we've seen so many inconsistencies, including the one that Pat Buchanan just mentioned. You know, it's going to be unbelievably small at one point. It's going to obviously not, as the president said last night, that we don't do pinpricks. I need a strong plan. It has to be part of a cohesive strategy before we use military force in Syria.
All right, today's September 11th, very dark day in our history, both 12 years ago, but also just a year ago. And you've written two letters with your colleague in the Senate, one to the FBI director and one to the president of the National Congress of Libya about Benghazi. What did you write and why?
Well, obviously, this is the one-year anniversary of September 11th last year, Benghazi, the attack on our consulate when we lost those 4 brave Americans. And at this point, I'm just troubled that we've not brought anyone to justice. And a recent New York Times report basically said that those that have been indicted for these crimes, including Ahmed Khattala, that we're not pushing, our government has not been pushing the Libyan authorities in the way that we could to bring them to justice, and that the Libyan authorities have not been cooperating in the way that they should, particularly what we did for that country. So today I wrote a letter with Senator Graham to the Libyan president saying, please cooperate. We expect you to cooperate. We demand for the relationship between our two countries for you to cooperate with American authorities. And we also wrote the director of FBI to say, how come you're not pushing the Libyan authorities to bring those terrorists to justice, because the victims deserve that.
And if they don't cooperate, Libya, having written this letter and they just they ignore it, what are you going to do then?
Well, I can tell you that we're going to continue absolutely pushing this, because this is a matter of bringing really the president following through on what he said of bringing these terrorists to justice. And we have an ability, I think, to put pressure on the Libyan government. We've been assisting them, obviously, throughout this with aid, and we can hold up their aid if they're not going to cooperate with us. So I think that's important, because we should bring them to justice.
Senator, thank you very much.
Thanks, Greta.
And now to Democratic Senator Bob Casey. He is part of a bipartisan group of U.S. senators working on a new deal to deal with Syria. He joins us. Good evening, sir. Senator, can you hear me? I guess the senator can't hear me, so while we fix that audio, I'll repeat the breaking news that just into Fox News is that the New York Times has a copy of an op-ed submitted by President Putin of Russia, in which he lectures President Obama on the use of force. He's obviously trying to make sure that we don't use a military strike in Syria. Language quite tough from President Putin. The irony, of course, not missed, that he's sort of going around the president to the American people by publishing this op-ed. Obviously, we're having private negotiations with Russia. Tomorrow, Secretary Kerry is going to meet with the Foreign Minister Lavrov in Geneva to talk about alternatives. But I think Senator Casey, can you hear me? Can't hear me, so let me go back to Senator Ayotte. Senator Ayotte, many of your colleagues in the past few days have indicated that they do not want military force. So it looks like if this were to be pushed to a vote, that the House would say no to use of military force, and it looks more and more like the Senate would also vote no to it. Where does that leave the United States? Are we just now we just sort of sit and take a public relations beating from the world? We worry about our credibility, and we worry that more weapons, chemical weapons, will be used against civilians.
Well, I think, Greta, at this point, it's because the administration has not put forth a strategy that actually is understandable. I mean, I've been deeply troubled by the inconsistencies here, and I think many of my colleagues have been as well. So they have to be clear on what their strategy is. You know, they said after the use of chemical weapons in June that they were going to support the moderate forces in the Free Syrian Army. And to my knowledge, they really haven't followed through fully on that. And that is a way that they could support the moderate forces there to make an impact on the Assad regime that could make a difference.
How do we know that the Free Syrian military, that they truly are moderate? I mean, when you look at sort of the map of Syria, of the people there, I counted up about 26 different opposition groups with all sorts of different backgrounds, some that may appear to be moderate, some which have al-Qaeda affiliations or are more extreme than others. Is that, it's not so easy that we just sort of pick one, and that group we know is going to be moderate, and that group is going to emerge as sort of the one to promote democracy in the region. I mean, it's very difficult.
Well, I'll tell you that this, Greta, I know that the Intelligence Committee has spent a substantial amount of time on this prior to the August 21st attack, and that the administration had already supported this and followed through on it. And yes, we have to be very, very careful in all this, but let's not forget how this began. This began not from foreign fighters coming into Syria. The reason the foreign fighters came into Syria is, frankly, we didn't have a strategy with regard to Syria, many al-Qaeda and others, but there's a core group within Syria that they basically were rising up against their government as part of the Arab Spring that are Syrians and not from other countries.
Senator, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Greta.
And of course,